Disney's Cruella, the novelization. Chapter 20. For once, Jasper was happy about the clouds that constantly seemed to cover the London sky. They blocked out the moon, making the night even darker, and keeping Horace and him in shadow as they stood on the roof of the Baroness's warehouse. Per Estella's instructions, they were supposed to get inside and make it look like Cruella had broken in. Glancing at Horace, Jasper nodded. It was time. Tugging on the rope tied around his waist to make sure it was tight, Jasper took a breath and jumped down through the open skylight. Horace followed, though not quite as gracefully. Landing in the middle of the designer's workroom, both boys stood still for a moment, their eyes scanning the area for any guards. The only light came from the open door to the security room. Through it, Jasper could make out the security guard. The man's head was down. "Asleep on the job," Jasper said, pleased. "You can't get good help these days," Horace replied. Jasper nodded in agreement. Then, keeping an eye on the guard, he got to work. He walked to a mannequin and knocked it over. Like the first domino in a line, the mannequin toppled and hit the next, which fell into the next, and with a mighty crash, half a dozen dress forms fell to the ground. Jasper's head snapped toward the guard. The man hadn't moved. Taking a look around the room, Jasper gave Horace a satisfied nod. The fallen mannequins were sure to draw the Baroness's attention. They had done their job. Now it was time to get out of there. Grabbing their ropes, the boys climbed back out of the warehouse. It was time to get home before they risked anyone catching them. Estella was nervous the next morning as she walked into the warehouse. Her conversation with the Baroness in the restaurant had played over and over in her head through the night. She was worried the woman was onto her. Estella just needed Cruella's identity to remain a secret for a little longer, and she needed Jasper and Horace's nighttime antics to help with the subterfuge. Would the Baroness believe that Cruella had broken in, or believe that Estella was somehow involved? She got her answer soon enough. Upon making her way upstairs to the Baroness's office for her morning check-in, Estella found the woman standing, arms crossed, as her security guards loaded the new collection of dresses into a portable vault. "What's going on?" Estella asked, hoping she sounded curious, not worried. The Baroness didn't even look over before answering. "She tried to break in last night." So the boys had done their job. That was good. But Estella needed to know more. "Who did?" she asked. "Please say Cruella. Please say Cruella," she added silently. "Cruella." Estella tried to keep the relief from her face. Her identity was still a secret. "Makes sense," the Baroness went on, too absorbed in herself to notice Estella's reaction. "It's a stunning, ludicrously expensive gown. Cruella could never afford to make it. But this Cruella has no shame. She may steal my creation." The Baroness paused and now met Estella's gaze. Her eyes were cold and full of challenge. "I mean, that would be a great idea, right? If you were her." Estella bit the inside of her cheek. She couldn't have thought she was out of the woods yet. Clearly, the Baroness was probing, trying to get her to break. Estella didn't say anything, though. She simply smiled, hoping that it was neutral enough. The Baroness shrugged. "Lucky I had my crack security team on high alert." From what Jasper and Horace had told her about their little trip to the warehouse the night before, the crack security team was more like a sleepy security guard. But she thought it best not to mention that. "You're always a step ahead," Estella said instead. "She's young, and she tries hard," the Baroness said. "But she's met her match, and she'll see that soon." With a wave of her hand, the last of the gowns was loaded into the vault. The large door shut with a clang, locking them all, including Estella's masterpiece, safely inside. Satisfied, the Baroness turned and left the room. The guards followed. Estella stayed behind for a moment, her eyes glued to the vault. A young seamstress who had been hiding in the corner, at the Baroness's command, stood and started to leave as well. As she passed, Estella smiled and lifted a pin from the cushion on the woman's wrist. Let the Baroness believe that Cruella had met her match. It was easier to win when your opponent thought they had the upper hand, and Estella was going to win, no matter what. Later that night, Estella sat hunched over her workspace in the lair. A row of dresses, her very own collection, were hanging on racks, waiting for Artie and the other dressmakers he'd brought in to help to steam them for the final show. Turning off his steamer, Artie stretched, letting out a yawn. It was late. Estella knew she should follow Artie's lead and call it a night, but she had more work to do. From the other room she heard the sound of the television as Horace watched a football match and talked to the Dalmatians. The big animals had become quite fond of Horace and spent most of their time glued to his side. Back before she had discovered the truth about the Baroness, Estella might very well have joined Horace. She would have cheered alongside him as their team played, maybe fallen asleep on the couch. But things were different now. She was different. All that mattered was getting her revenge. Hearing footsteps, Estella didn't look up as Jasper put a cup of hot coffee down in front of her. "Night," he said softly. She still didn't look up as she threaded her needle through the fabric in her hand. It was the last stitch on the last dress. The collection that she had worked on every night since Cruella's birth was nearly complete. She needed to focus, but she could feel Jasper's eyes on her. "What?" she asked. "Where are you?" Jasper asked. He sounded worried. That bothered Estella. "I'm right here," she said sharply, "working toward a deadline." Jasper shook his head. "I miss Estella," he said. In the other room, Horace shouted happily as his team scored. The dogs joined in, barking. Estella turned, annoyed by the noise. She stared at the three dogs for a moment. "They would actually make fabulous coats," she said finally. Jasper looked horrified, and she laughed. "I'm joking!" But the smile didn't meet her eyes, and Jasper's expression didn't change. Jasper wanted to talk about things he missed. Well, Estella missed the Jasper who had a sense of humor. She wouldn't seriously harm a dog just to make a coat, even if they did have delicious spots. Jasper sighed. "You know, we've all had bad things happen to us," he said. "Me, you, we've always been there for each other." Estella had had enough. She didn't need Jasper throwing her a guilt trip that night, of all nights. He was right. Bad things had happened to them, so why couldn't he let her find a way to make them right? "That's all I'm asking," she snapped. "Is it so hard to support me? Back me up?" "Help Estella? No," Jasper said. "That's easy. To help Cruella? It's a nightmare." "That's that understatement thing you do," Horace shouted from the other room. "It's worse than that." Estella shot Horace a glare he couldn't see. Then she looked at Jasper. "Cruella gets things done," she said matter-of-factly. "Estella does not, and I have things to do." She turned back to the dress in her hand, hoping Jasper would take the hint. He didn't. He kept looking at her, with an expression she couldn't quite read, but definitely didn't like. "So if you're done chatting," she said leadingly. He still didn't move. Taking a page from the Baroness, Estella added, "And when I say if, I mean you are." Jasper sighed. Point, finally, taken. Turning to go, he stopped, as if he wanted to say more, but with a shake of his head, he headed toward the couch. Good, Estella thought as she turned back to her dress. Peace at last. A moment later, though, one of the Dalmatians walked in and sank down on a cushion near her. Estella raised an eyebrow. The creature clearly hadn't heard her joke. "Aren't you brave?" she said. Then with a smile, she turned back to her work. Jasper could be upset with her. Horace could be scared of her. She didn't care. Not now. Soon enough they would see that she had been right all along, and that revenge would be the best heist they ever pulled off.